So without more editorializing, I would like to ask our first witness, Professor Richard Ainsworth, Director, Graduate Tax Program, Boston University, to come to testify. Good morning.
Morning, Senator Kruger. Thank you very much for inviting me to this hearing again.
Yes.
We tried to do this a while back. In the meantime, 23 other states have passed legislation, lots of it modeled on your earlier legislation and proposals.
I often find my bill get passed in other states sooner than here in New York. We'll discuss that at another time.
They're darn good, and people should look for this to pass here in New York too. The big problem in some of this sales suppression area, oh, by the way, I teach value-added tax at NYU, and I'm director of the graduate tax program at Boston University. I specialize in comparative tax analysis. This is transaction taxes. The other tax that's comparable to the retail sales tax is the value-added tax, and many of the people that are proposing solutions for what would be a problem in the retail sales tax are taking their information from the value-added tax. It's really comparable, and there's a lot of good material there, like Quebec, for example, has a gross goods and services tax. The issue for us is going to be how much is lost once you have sales suppression. It's like almost impossible to figure out how much is actually lost. So the work goes towards preserving the records. This is, in the European Union, a terrorist funding problem. There's huge amounts of money lost, so they're very interested in this. We have also funded terrorists through the retail sales tax in the United States. It's a business problem because the guy across the street is doing things to suppress his sales, where the honest taxpayer has the option of either becoming like the dishonest guy across the street, or is he going to remain honest and comparable. What I did in the first part of this presentation was I took a paper that was going to be published with the American University Law Review. I followed a particular zapper from Canada. It was manufactured in Canada, it was sold in Canada, and it was used in restaurants in Canada. And we see that the Canadian government is after the user, then they're after the salesman, and then they're after the manufacturer. The same piece of software crosses the border from Canada into the United States. It shows up in Seattle and it shows up in Chicago. There are some problems with where we're pursuing this in the United States. We had a problem with the FBI pursuing it in Chicago. We have some search warrants that are out in Washington also. Washington fortunately had a statute, and they're trying to enforce the statute now against the users and against the salesmen in Washington. What you need to understand is that these types of software are specific to certain POS systems, and what you need to do is you need a database, and the database has to say the restaurants in my area or the businesses in my area using a particular type of POS system or a certain type of cash register. And when you can identify something either elsewhere in the United States or in a foreign jurisdiction, you need to think that maybe it's going to come to New York. And if it comes to New York, who am I going to audit? So you need to pull that up out of your local database. That first article sort of summarizes how this particular item crosses the border. The more important item is it took 15 years for us to identify it in Chicago. So it may well have been here for quite a while before that. If we look comparatively at the statutes, you notice what the New York statute does is it calls this use maybe a felony, and it lists a number of things like purchase, possess, install, update, upgrade, transfer. Sell is a penalty for each individual sale. Look down, and I've sort of outlined things that might be thought about if you're looking at this statute. One of them is many jurisdictions don't have anything special with the use of some of this software or the use of this suppression software. New York at least imposes a penalty on it. Other jurisdictions, and there's a number of them, only impose the amount of tax and the amount of interest and the amount of penalties that are involved. If you don't know how much was stolen, it's really hard to figure out what the penalties are. And New York is a good job here in determining that it's a felony, and so you got some jail time. New York does not include the manufacturer, which is exactly the same problem we talked about in the earlier paper. You need maybe to say, if we're concerned about a piece of software entering the state of New York and is being manufactured or reproduced in New York, the statute needs to be designed so it'll grab those types of people. So you can see that in Louisiana, you can see it in Maine, North Dakota, you can see it in the state of Washington. And Washington has this one that crossed the border. Unlike the people in Chicago, they don't have a statute that allows them to go after a manufacturer. There's a concept of a guarantor in here, that sometimes if you can't find the user, or if the user has gone bankrupt, or if you can't get the rest of the state's money, you need a provision in here that says other people who sold the software or other people who manufactured the software are liable for the full extent of the losses to the state of New York, not just the person who used the software being liable for it. There are various states that do that: Georgia, Connecticut, Michigan, North Carolina. So I list the states, and those are the statutes that would have a manufacturer's and a guarantor provision for you. Many states call this contraband. So if you find a piece of software like this, you can keep it, which makes a nice training mechanism for the people in the Department of Revenue or the government to use and to figure out how the software works. They will also consider any device that has one of these pieces of software and also contraband. So you can go in and take the POS system in some of these jurisdictions. Recently in the state of North Dakota, they allow you to go in and take the software without a warrant. I think that might be a little bit too far, but you need to be able to take this software so that you can figure out what it is and how to use it. There's a business licensing revocation provision in a number of jurisdictions where if you're caught using this type of software, then we'll revoke your business license for a period of time. The state of Washington has a very interesting provision that says, if we revoke your license and you enter into an agreement with us, we're going to put you under a supervision system, so we'll be able to follow your transactions for the next 5 or 6 years and make sure that you are on the right side of the thing. So we're not going to take you out of business, but we're going to take you out of the business of using software to defeat the purpose. The state of Tennessee offers a bounty. New York doesn't offer a bounty. They'll give you 50% of the fines that they collect, up to $10,000. You should consider that. You might consider what Rhode Island does also. They have an amnesty provision if somebody turns somebody in, or if they turn themselves in, or they'd be immune from the penalties. North Dakota has a 100% penalty of the amount of tax that's determined to be due. Frequently, we don't know how much they've taken, so a 100% penalty works well. In the age of the internet, it used to come on CDs. It used to be embedded inside of the POS system. It used to be on a thumb drive. Now you're going to be able to download this software from the internet. There is the possibility that this type of software that they've discovered in Washington that was borrowed from the folks across the border in the state of British Columbia is downloaded through the internet. If that is the mechanism for delivering this software, it becomes much more difficult to find it. You're not looking for a thumb drive. You're not looking for a CD. You're looking for their internet connection. In fact, some of these people are operating backwards, so that the sales that you make for takeout, it happens, I think you had that in Healthalicious down here in Manhattan, where you would call in on the internet and order something, and the whole ordering process would happen on the internet. It's happening in the cloud. In other words, the zapper is not in the state of New York. It's not in the location. The zapper is really offshore. It's offshore in a foreign jurisdiction. So you're zapping not in New York. It's not like I wrote a paper on sales suppression as a service. It's not like the guys coming from Pennsylvania and wandering into Manhattan and delivering this service of sales suppression. So you can find the people in Pennsylvania if you wanted to go across the border. This is in the Caribbean. This is in Taiwan. You would have to use treaties in order to go after the people that are using it. The solution would be to encrypt the data on the location and preserve it when it's there at the look. So here we are, and the solutions that we're looking at, all of the solutions are really revolved around preserving the data. Now, there's two parts to a sales tax. One part is the data, and the other part is the money. There have been a lot of people proposing, why don't we split off the money and deliver the money directly to the government immediately? Now, you've got, I think you've got somebody here that's going to present something like that.
Yes.
People have focused a lot on the money. What you really need is the data. Now, both the sales tax and the money part of it, the businesses can keep the money for a while, and then they remit it to the government. People have been trying to get that money a little bit faster. What we're looking at in the data area is the data has been, through historical accident, the data has been presented to the government late. You can get this data in real time, you can get it immediately. So it's the data portion of this thing, not the money portion of it. Lots of people have looked at the money part of it. I sort of listed a number of the jurisdictions. There's some states that have proposed it. There's some foreign jurisdictions that do it currently. So the money comes in, but the data to support the money doesn't come in. And this is what we're really looking at. In order to get the data, what you need is, you need security, you need verification, and you need availability. So the security of the data is the most paramount issue here. We're looking for an audit trail. It has to be unambiguous. It has to be stored. It has to be in a place that can't be tampered with. The storage could either be on-site or it could be with the department. It could be with the state. The data can come immediately. If you keep the data on location, you do have to visit the location in order to identify where the data is. And I think Revenue Quebec keeps the data on site. Other jurisdictions drag the data back to the tax administration itself. Verification of the data, it has to be able to be verified by anybody. Anybody should be able to look at a receipt and determine what happened on the receipt, how much tax should have been collected, what was purchased. And this is just a matter of encryption, but the scope of the encryption has to be comprehensive. And then it has to be available to anybody, available to auditors, available to the business itself, and also available to the consumers, because the consumers need to know that when I went into a store and purchased something and I paid the tax for something, then it was registered and I can deliver that to the state. I know, and I can help the state collect the revenue. Each receipt should have a traceable electronic signature. It should have the date, the timestamp, other stuff, so listed there. System should be in place so anybody can determine whether it's real or false. I know of a company that makes sandwiches, and what they're concerned about the fraud that's happening in their own company. Like, you hire this guy that's the night store manager, but he really is doing a PhD at MIT, so he really understands computers. He's stealing not only from the state, he's stealing from the company. So the company is concerned that there's this type of fraud going on, and they're losing their own revenue. Sincerely, there is a state business alliance here, so that if the state cooperates with the businesses, there are a number of businesses very concerned. They're willing to install some of these systems themselves to encrypt the data, to catch the guy from MIT who's installing a zapper at night. There's a good alliance here. Where's the money? Well, I made an estimate, I think it was back for the other hearing we were at. I estimated that you lose about $1.7 billion every year, based on the Quebec numbers, which are based on restaurants only. So I'm thinking that you're losing more than $1.7 billion, but the number that I can come up with roughly is just based on GDP. I say based on how big the GDP is in Quebec, based on how big it is in New York, which is larger than Quebec. If they're eating the same amount at the same kinds of restaurants, and if that sort of cross-the-border happens, then what is New York losing? It's losing somewhere close to $2 billion a year every year, and probably has been losing it for the last 10 or 15 years. So that's the first part of the money. The second part of the money is, if you wanted to install a system that would encrypt and keep this data secure in the state of New York, you got a menu of choices. You can go with what Slovenia does, which is a digital certificate. It's free. You could do what Croatia does. It's a system, the certificate, you purchase it for $40 and you have a 5-year use for the process. Germany has a card that is manufactured. It had a separate part of the government and went off and did some work at the INSACA group, and I wrote for them a little bit. that their card will cost you $30 or 25 euros to install inside of a POS system. It'll encrypt the data and keep it there on location. It doesn't transmit it back to the revenue authority. In Rwanda, their system cost $118. Rwanda is like a poorer place. A lot of these places are coming out of Africa. The reason they're coming out of Africa is because they're leapfrogging the rest of the world. They have no infrastructure, they have no cash registers, but they've got cell phones and they've got the technology. So you can strap this on top of the technology in Rwanda, and instead of jumping on a water buffalo and going doing the audit, what you wind up doing is you do it back at the tax administration. You do it back at the headquarters. The data comes into the tax administration. They put artificial intelligence on it, and then they know where they got their problems. So Rwanda does it for $318, but there's a range of things. The Swedish control unit probably costs $450, but you got to do some upgrades to the system. Belgium has one for $450. Quebec has a fairly high, expensive one, but that's because they were early into the system, and the prices on that stuff are starting to come down. So those are the initial costs, and those costs are going to be borne by somebody. If you take the Quebec approach, they're going to be borne by the government and they'll get their money back. If you take other approaches, it's going to be borne by the business, which is not all that happy sometimes, because they say that $1,000 is a lot of money. To me, it really isn't. The thing you need to look at next is what's the return on investment. If you take the Quebec approach, the return on investment might be somewhere between 6 months and 9 months. So totally paid for before the fiscal year is out. The rest of it's all revenue that comes in. For example, when they did this in Croatia, as soon as they installed these systems in Croatia, the amount of money that was received in every restaurant doubled within the year. So it's like there was a lot of leakage in the system. So you've got to watch out. If you wind up owning this software yourself, if the state of New York owns the software rather than have a third party own the software, it's like everything else in software. There are updates that happen. There have been over 200 updates that have happened to the Quebec system, which requires the guys from Quebec, because they own the software, to go out and put the patches on the system. Then they have to recertify the system to make sure the patches are there. If you have a third party providing it, then the third party should be able to certify to the state that all the systems have been updated. In addition, if the data comes back to the tax administration and you strap some really good artificial intelligence on top of it, you will know who has updated and who has not updated the system, and you can send a little letter out or an email out to the people and says, you haven't updated your system, we're pulling you offline for a while, and that'll get a decent response out of the people. So real time for data. Real time is you need sophisticated risk analysis performed back at the head office. A long time ago, I asked the guys in Quebec, because they were really advanced, I said, why don't you send this back to the tax administration? And they said, well, we're not willing to do that yet, Richard. And I said, but other people will send the data back to the tax administration. I said, there's lots of reasons to do it that way. He says, nah, we'd rather go out and do it our way. And you need to think, if you're thinking about tomorrow, about collecting this data, totally encrypting the data, sending it into the tax administration, and then getting some really good artificial intelligence on top of it to show you where the problems are. Numbers of countries are starting to do that now. So you need real-time support to send out the inspectors. What can you do? If you are an auditor, you could, with real-time data, go to the restaurant, visit the restaurant, notice how many people are in the restaurant, and type in an app on your machine to see if they're actually recording things at the time when the restaurant is open. Like you have 500 people in the restaurants and only 2 sales are coming in, and you know it from your app, then you can immediately go talk to the people. Real-time data does a lot for you. There are indications in Slovenia and Croatia and some of those other places where they're actually doing that. They're putting the app on the machine to do it. What the real-time consumer does for you, the real-time consumer, if you allow this thing to encrypt and give a person a receipt, what he gets is a receipt with a barcode at the bottom of the whole thing. He can type it into the website, and he can see if his receipt actually went into the tax administration. And they'll do this for you. There's millions of them going in on a regular basis in, what's this country? Slovenia. And what they do is this, consumers are checking the receipts to make sure the receipts went into the tax administration. 97% of them show up, they're correct. 3% of them show up and they're wrong. So the ones that are wrong, the consumers have identified who they are. Now, 28% of the businesses in Slovenia had an opportunity to use a free POS system provided by the government because they were small businesses. They paid nothing for it. And there's a shopping cart. It's like a square that you use at the mall. It's all provided by the government, and the POS system takes care of everything for them. It's wildly popular. In Rhode Island, what we're looking at in Rhode Island, I did a presentation in Rhode Island, and one of the questions from the audience was, gee, if you get these people to send in these receipts to the government, and we keep a file of the receipts to the government, could we make a game out of this? Like my wife does this all the time. She's part of some things, and she, does her exercise and sends it in. They give her points, they give her coins and stuff like that. You can make a game out of this. So we're going to develop an app. We're going to give it to this, I got some guys that do computer stuff. We're going to develop a computer game, give it to the state of Rhode Island. They're going to run a program called Keeping Rhode Island Honest. So the tax administration is going to say, take this app, go out to these stores, give us these, just take a photocopy of the receipt. So we'll have a copy of the receipts here in the tax administration, and we'll give you some points for doing this. Once you get the points, why people like this social media stuff, I don't 100% know, but they do. And it becomes, if it becomes popular, then the tax administration of Rhode Island will have a list of receipts from all of the businesses that the people visited. The people out there will get some points, they'll get some benefits. The sandwich shop wanted to do this. The one that had the night store manager that graduated from MIT. They'll put a kiosk at the front of the store, and they'll convince the people that are purchasing sandwiches at the store to go to the kiosk, punch in their receipt, and they'll get a coupon. They'll say $5 off next time you come to the store. But what they're doing is they're keeping all of their records honest. They're promoting their business, and it fits into what social media is. You can use this in order to enhance tax collection, but you've got to digitize it. Once you do it, playing field is level, businesses are happy, tax administration can collect the money, and your artificial intelligence in Brazil is right now identifying where the tax administration has to go. There is a state in Brazil, brings all the data in centrally, they can identify where to go, where to do their audits. It's marvelous, to tell you the truth.
Professor, I'm going to have to ask you to sum up. Was there anything else you wanted to close with?
No, we're done.
Because I don't want to cut you off. Fascinating, and I think other people in the audience might understand why we wanted to have you here today and to have you testify first, because your research for so many years helps us understand various models that are being used throughout the world. It reinforces to me that New York State is way behind where we could be and should be. The recognition, as you described, that it's this kind of fraud can take place via the internet without even being on shore. It can be being done against the business themselves,
yes,
as well as against the tax collection by the state of New York. You bring up such really excellent points about why it's so important to have the data and keep the data for doing analysis. I guess I would just also highlight, because I know one of the concerns out there by businesses, the enormous number of audits and fines, and particularly for smaller businesses, the demands on them when the state comes calling, and the fact that if you collect this information correctly, there's much less likelihood you're ever going to find yourself attempting to sit with an auditor with pieces of paper trying to backtrack exactly what happened when.
You could offer in the statute that if somebody was willing to adopt this thing voluntarily, like what they're trying to do in the state of Washington a little bit, you could say, if you volunteer to be part of this system so your data is collected and sent to the tax administration, we can guarantee you a no penalty audit because the data will be here. You could do like what they do in Norway, and you design the tax return and send them a copy of the tax return. This is what we have, this is what you owe, this is the money that we've already collected from you, no problem. You just sign the bottom of the return. You can do the return for them digitally.
Wow. Well,
It's there, Liz.
it's there, it's all possible. I want to thank you for coming and testifying. I want to urge everybody who's here today to take a look at the professor's testimony, which, you know, is quite academic, but he footnotes a million other places you can go for more information. So thank you so much for being here today, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you.